Now with online learning, most of the applications really combine the two options for communication. They're not one or the other very much. But that's still something that is an important distinction. You see a lot in the attempts to look at the literature and think about how online learning can be more effective. Oops. In terms of learner control, this is to what extent can the learner decide what to look at within the instructional resources online versus having the system control the sequence, what is looked at, the pacing. And can the learner in fact go back over something or choose to explore one thing and not another? So that's learner control. And then finally, instructional approach, which we used 3 categories, and these are pretty global categories. It's not a terribly fine distinction, but I'll try to explain them. So first is expository, what you might call transmission teaching. This is transmitting information, presenting content to the learner. So that's kind of the most basic version of online instruction. Secondly is what we call active learning, and here the learner is interacting with the course materials. So the learner might be practicing skills online. They might be creating graphs. They might be interacting with the simulation. So that's active learning. And then we have interactive learning designs. And in interactive learning designs, there is more than one person involved. And the people are interacting with a set of resources, but the learning content actually is not fixed. It emerges through the interaction of the people who are communicating with each other and interacting with the learning resources. So in this case, this is for political science. It's a virtual, I don't know how well you can see it, it's a virtual newsstand, and it has information resources about political issues, and secondary school students work on this in groups and actually engage in case studies around issues that they've chosen to investigate. So the learning content actually, the nature of the instruction emerges over time. It's not fixed in advance. It's a rich set of resources, but it's really something that depends on the particular students and instructor that are engaged in this online learning. So you can't really talk about it in advance. All right, so that concludes just kind of a brief overview of some of the different features. And now I'd like to talk about some analysis we did of the research that's been done in online learning. We did this for the United States Department of Education, and they asked us to conduct a meta-analysis of studies on the effectiveness of online learning. And a meta-analysis is a systematic, quantitative way to summarize previous research. So it's not a good way to uncover new insights into learning or new insights that are at a very detailed, fine-grained level, but it is an objective way to try to summarize the research that's been done. And this was for policymakers. That's really what they wanted to see. So it takes a whole set of studies and then looks at the outcomes, combines those over the studies, and shows what the average outcome or average effect looks like. And I'll explain how that worked in this case. Previous meta-analyses on distance learning, of which there were a number, had generally concluded that distance learning and face-to-face learning were about equal in terms of their effects. But many of these previous meta-analyses lumped together a wide variety of different kinds of distance learning. So it might be video conferencing, it might be a correspondence course where they send you workbooks by mail. It could be almost anything. They also combine different kinds of outcome measures. So the outcomes were often, did the student think they had learned? Was the student satisfied? Did the student complete the course? Did the instructor think the student had learned? So we did something a little bit different. First, we wanted to set this clearly in the digital age. And so we wanted only internet-based instruction included in the meta-analysis. Secondly, we wanted only studies that in fact looked at some kind of objective, quantified measure of student learning. So not just whether the instructor thought the students had learned, but some kind of objective measure of student learning. And the third thing is that we set some parameters for the quality of the study design. A lot of the research in online learning has been case studies. This is what happened in my course when I did my course. I gave the course, this many students finished it, they liked it. So we required a research study to be included in this meta-analysis to either have an experimental design where students were assigned at random to either an online, and it could be blended, but some kind of online and some kind of face-to-face condition, or it could be a quasi-experiment where they were not assigned, but at least there was some measure before the learning experience on which the two groups could be statistically equated. Because if you don't do that, and you give online instruction to one class, and you give face-to-face instruction to another class, but it turns out that all your advanced students were in the first class, then you measure learning at the end. It's not a fair comparison. So these had to be studies that would allow you, I'm so sorry, that would allow you to make a fair comparison. We reviewed studies, we went through databases of research. It had to be research published in English. That was another restriction, but it could be research done elsewhere. I know we had one study from Taiwan. Taiwan's 6th grade class was in this meta-analysis. We reviewed over 1,000 articles to find articles that met the criteria for inclusion in the meta-analysis. And out of those articles, we were able to find actually just 51 effects that could be used in a meta-analysis that could be combined. The other requirement was that the articles had to give enough information to compute an effect size. That's the difference between the treatment and the control outcome over the standard deviation. So it's kind of like a z-score. So when we did that, what we found, which you've already seen since my slides have been taking off like a racehorse, we found a surprising result. It was not just that the online learning outcomes were as good as face-to-face. They were, in fact, although by a small amount, but it was statistically significant, they were better than the face-to-face outcomes. So this was very surprising to us and to many people. When we divided the studies into those that had been blended compared to face-to-face and those that were purely online versus face-to-face, the bigger average advantage for online was for the blended, so where you had both the classroom and the online experience together. So you can see the average difference is a little over 1/3 of the standard deviation. And that's starting to be the kind of thing that people would be interested in. And I think it's important because from a policymaker perspective, it does give you a research-based argument for pursuing putting your instruction into a blended mode. That takes time, it takes resources. You have to invest in the staff time to do it. And here we have some empirical data to support that.